As we reported, the Trump administration announced today that the U.S. would officially suspend participation in the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF, beginning tomorrow. As Nick Schifrin reports, that starts a 6-month window for Russia and the U.S. to either make a last-minute deal or lose a landmark agreement that helped reduce Cold War tensions.
For the first time in history, the language of arms control was replaced by arms reduction.
It was 1987, and President Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev laid a cornerstone of nuclear arms reduction, a treaty that eliminated an entire class of U.S. and Soviet missiles.
Today, on this vital issue, at least, we have seen what can be accomplished when we pull together.
Both sides removed thousands of warheads and destroyed ground-launched missiles with a range of 300 to 3,400 miles. But for the last few years, the U.S. says Russia has developed and deployed this missile on display last week in Moscow that violates the treaty, and Russia refused U.S. requests to destroy it. Today, President Trump said as long as Russia wasn't abiding by the treaty, neither would the U.S.
So unless we're going to have something that we all agree to, we can't be put at the disadvantage of going by a treaty, limiting what we do when somebody else doesn't go by that treaty.
But the Russians say this American missile defense system in Romania could be modified to launch an offensive missile, and therefore the U.S. is the violator. Today, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov called the U.S. suspension a mistake.
We think that the agreement is essential. It is within interests of our security and European security, and it would be irresponsible for one side to shatter it.
Europe has been probably the one that has benefited the most.
Today, NATO backed the U.S. accusation against Russia, but some European officials, like EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini, fear the start of a new arms race. From the late 70s through the late 80s, the Soviet Union and the U.S. deployed mobile, nuclear-tipped missiles to Europe. The INF eliminated them, and European officials say they don't want to turn back the clock.
What we definitely don't want to see is our continent going back to being a battlefield or a place where other superpowers confront themselves. This belongs to a faraway history.
Senior administration officials say they have no plans to acquire or deploy intermediate-range missiles to Europe or anywhere else. But the Pentagon has a research and development program into new missiles ready to go. And a NATO official tells PBS NewsHour the U.S. has raised the idea of testing a new non-nuclear ground-launched cruise missile this year.
I think that ultimately will cause some unnecessary friction with our best friends in the world, that is, the allies in NATO.
Tom Countryman was the Obama administration's top arms control official. He says today's U.S. decision is a mistake because it doesn't solve the problem, the Russian missile that violates the treaty and threatens Europe.
It does not address the European security disadvantage created by the new Russian deployment. And secondly, because it allows Russia to get out of this treaty that has served U.S. and European interests well, while blaming the United States.
But Russia's not the only country that fields intermediate-range missiles. U.S. officials say China and Iran each have more than 1,000 missiles that would violate the INF if they were party to it, raising questions about the future of intermediate missiles and of arms control. The U.S. is currently debating what to do about the New START treaty that limits the number of strategic nuclear weapons. U.S. officials predict a divide between National Security Advisor John Bolton, critical of arms control, and Pentagon officials who favor extending New START. Today, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the U.S. was only interested in extending the treaty if
it protects the American people, protects our allies around the world as well, and has provisions that other countries are both capable and willing to comply with and allow us to verify that they have complied with those agreements. Absent that, it's just sitting around a table talking.
In 1987, years of talking allowed the two titans of the Cold War a little banter over an old Reagan line.
The maxim is, dovii no provii, trust but verify.
Today, the U.S. and Russia have little trust and won't let each other verify. And both countries are preparing for a future without the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.